Good evening, Boston Unity Group. Welcome to our May presentation 2023. It's been a couple of months and we're glad to be back. Let's hope everyone can hear us. Audience, please raise a note. Yes, we're looking good apparently. Can you hear us, audience? That's the question of the day. Confirmed. Confirmed. Thank you, Aaron. We can hear. Great. Thanks, guys. And girls and people, y'all. Right. Do we have any announcements this month?
There's quite a few upcoming events that we should probably mention. See, we have the Career Game Dev Boston monthly hangout happening June 11th. The Boston Postmortem is happening June 13th. It's a postmortem of Hellscaper, which is a deck builder dungeon crawler. We have Boston Indies on the 20th, talking about Jackbox. And then on the 25th of June, we have the Boston Game Dev Summer Barbecue. And that'll be in Cambridge in a local park. So all of the info for all this is all on the meetup page for Boston Game Dev. I'll throw a link in the chat. You can go check it out.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just noticed there's another notice. There's apparently going to be a game jam this weekend in person in Kendall Square, the Cookie Jam. It sounds delicious. I do hope all of the games involve cookies. Not the browser type, because that would be boring. So, but yeah, come and join us on the Boston Game Dev Slack. There's pretty much everyone in the local community is on there. All of the events are mentioned in there, so you get to hear about these exciting things first, and you can ask questions and share problems or excitement. You know, announcements. Look, I just launched a game. That kind of a thing. So that is on slack.bostongamedev.com. Correct? Yes, I think so. Yes. Excellent. Yep. If anyone in the audience has any announcements to make, then, you know, please let us know. I have to see what the closed captions on Twitch are saying about what we are talking about. Yes. Yes. Okay, so auto-generated captions are a thing on Twitch. You'll be very pleased to know. I am terribly sorry. They are very bad at understanding what it is we're saying. So maybe we'll all have to talk extremely slowly and clearly. Enunciating.
Something ChatGPT, something AI taking over the world.
Yeah, clearly our jobs are at threat here. Something to do with old Kirk. Whatever that meant. Okay, right. So moving on from AI, let's introduce Shane. Shane is one of our local devs. He is here to talk about VFX in Unity. Thank you very much for joining us this month, Shane, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm honored. All right, let me share my screen here. Okay, how we doing? We got a screen?
We do have a screen.
All right. So if you don't know me, I'm Shane. I founded a company in 2019 called Evil Villain Games with Kiril Pashev. We are currently working on a game called Rolling Rogues, so I'll be showing some of that today. And my talk today is about VFX. So this is kind of like an introductory talk about VFX. So if you're like a VFX professional, might not be like a ton of new stuff in here for you, but I don't know. I find that whenever I look at other VFX artist materials, there's always something that like they're doing that's kind of novel because it's the discipline itself is very experimental. So there's just a lot of different stuff you can do with it. Yeah, and if you're new to VFX, then this is for you. All right. So VFX are made like primarily by people who are kind of hybrid artists, engineers. And what I mean by that is like you either start as an artist and you learn more technical skills like programming and how graphical pipelines work and things like that, or you're starting as a programmer and you're learning art skills like color theory and composition, stuff like art skills. I actually started as a animator, and then I did some illustration. I worked in a graphic design studio for a little bit. Went to art school for a little, and I was a videographer for 5 years. And eventually I ended up in Unity, and I've been doing that for about 8 years, programming in C# primarily, but I still do a lot of art stuff. So we're a two-man team at Evil Villain Games, so I do a lot of different things, and I find that like a good intersection of all those things is VFX. So what are VFX? Well, visual effects or VFX is like a really general term, right? Like it's like it could be like anything on the screen. The reason why it's so general is because there's like it really is like a lot of different things. But usually we're talking about like kind of a mush of animations, models, textures, particles, shaders, materials, and there's often like a lot of code involved too in some VFX. It's kind of like I said, it's like very experimental. Like you could have like a water VFX, and it could be, it could be a waterfall, which could be either like a model with a shader on it, or it could be a bunch of particles. There's a lot of different ways to do water, but they're all usually considered VFX. But so for the most part in games, VFX are used for feedback or environmental effects. So what is feedback? Feedback is like anything that communicates something to your player when they perform an action. So you can kind of imagine like there being, a campfire or something, and you walk into the campfire and your character gets lit on fire, and like that's bad, fire's hot. So that's feedback, and that would be feedback through VFX. There might also be like damage numbers, part of the UI or something, but there's a ton of different ways to get feedback. And you want the feedback to be teaching the player something like intuitively, right? You don't want to be like over tutorializing your game and like telling them every single thing about your game. You want to be kind of teaching them things through like a response. And that's a really good place to use feedback. So I wanted to show this example. This is from Breath of the Wild. So if anyone's played Breath of the Wild, which I imagine a lot of you have, there's, when you're out in a thunderstorm, if you have metal weapons on you, you could get struck by lightning. And so there's a VFX for this, which is, you can see the VFX is actually like really targeted right on the edge of that weapon there, because that weapon's metal. So it's kind of telling you like, hey, this is the problem. You got to deal with this, and you've got to deal with it fast. And it's, the sound effect is increasing in cadence, and so is the VFX, until you get struck by lightning. And yeah, at that point, it's pretty obvious what the feedback was telling you. So yeah, feedback comes in many forms. It's not just VFX. There's also sound effects, and like UI, narrative, game mechanics can give you feedback if you're losing health. So this is just my opinion, but like I really feel like VFX is kind of like the heart and soul of games. It's like a place where like tons of disciplines come together. I think sound effects and VFX go hand in hand. Like you need to always have a sound effect with your VFX. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's very, I guess, near and dear to my heart. And I think in a way it represents like what games are about. All right, so I wanted to show like a bunch of examples as most of the talk. So I kind of, so we can like delve into like some actual breakdowns of VFX that I've worked on. So yeah. This is a wall slam effect I made for Rolling Rogues. It's modeled after the Smash Bros. Wall slam effect, so you might actually recognize it. There's some really like neat nuggets of information that I think you can pull out when you look at other people's VFX or like look at other games. I actually go on YouTube and I'll watch like YouTube videos or trailers of games or gameplay of games that like 0.25 speed, just like this actually, so that I can just kind of break down each model and particle effect that's happening. And you always find something that you wouldn't expect. And there's one specific thing that I thought was really neat with this particular effect. So I'll show that. Got some saved games here in Unity that I'm going to use. So let me just get this set up. Let's cheat here. Okay. It's a lot harder to do live than it was this afternoon.
Don't worry, we're all watching you. It's all good.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So yeah, there's this neat kind of effect that they use in Smash Bros. Where the sort of this cylinder here, that's kind of the main, this is a bit like the core of the effect, I would say. It has this interesting UV where no matter what angle you're looking at it from, the front is always low and the back is always very high. So you can see like it's not actually rotating. It might even look like it's rotating, but it's just whatever angle I look at it from, the character is sort of always revealed, and they always have this kind of like tall background effect. And the way they accomplish that is really kind of unique, I think. There's actually like two different models, or at least the way that I replicate it is by using two different models that are on top of each other. And then I'm having one model render out facing and one is rendering in facing. So you'll see these little blue ticks here. Some of them are going in and some of them are going out. Those are the normals. And so what happens is if you offset the texture, so over here, I'm offsetting the texture map by about half. And that gives you, it kind of crops the outside cylinder's texture down, and the inside cylinder's texture is a lot higher. And it creates this effect where, it's high in the back over here, but if I look at it from over there, it lowers itself based on where I'm looking. So that was just a really neat effect that I picked up from that. And then other than that, it's kind of just these two bones that I'm using to control, like that's how this is animated, right? Using to control it and like flare everything out. And then there's a bunch of textures that go into this. So I made the textures in Photoshop. This wraps around the cylinders and it also tiles. So if I wanted to like adjust the density of these spikes, I can do that pretty easily. These are two frame-by-frame animations that I made in Photoshop. You'll see one of them is this billboard here. That's this guy. And then there's these little puffs of smoke that come out after, the controls. There we go. Zoom controls are in the way of my frame step here. Oh, all right. There's our first Unity crash. Yeah, so anyway, those are frame-by-frame animated particle effects, or this is a billboard, just a single particle, and this is a bunch of little billboards. And then I animated the whole thing in Unity. And I'm using animation events to trigger the particles at certain times during this effect. And here's sort of the final result. So don't mind me while I open Unity again in the background here. Yeah, so like you can see that like this is all happening really, really fast. Even in Smash Bros, it's kind of like you like blink and it's gone. And there's a lot going on here. But it's kind of necessary because you want to know, like in this instance, you want to know when you've contacted the ground. In our game, there's like a lot of things that hook into slamming things into walls. So we want to make sure the player knows when that's happened. So like, what's the difference between the enemy just touching the wall and actually being like slammed into it at a high speed? Yeah, so that's kind of the point of that. Okay, we're going to talk about the dash next if we can get Unity back open, which hopefully will happen soon. Yeah, so this dash, I kind of wanted to show off how like unclear it is that the dash is actually happening without the VFX. Our game is kind of not, we don't have like all the animations that a game like Dark Souls has because our characters are round. So the VFX are extra important in that case. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties here, I guess.
So this always happens on presentations.
I know, right?
You've summoned
like,
it now.
I did this like 3 times today, but we're having some. Okay, I think we're back. Hopefully.
We had one question in chat, which was, "Do you make your own impact FX?"
Yeah. So if you're talking about the damage effects, we can look at those too. Those are pretty simple. There is one thing to note about them that's kind of neat, which is that there's like frame stun. So here, go back into that room there. So there's actually, you probably won't be able to see it on stream, but well, unless I frame step here, which I could do. So right when the animation like impacts, there's actually a capsule collider on here too. Right when the animation impacts, there's everything freezes. So I'm actually using code to freeze the velocity of both characters and all their animations. And I'm even pausing this particle effect for like a couple frames. Like it's not really going anywhere right now. And this is the particle effect we use for our impact, which is, it's just a bunch of sparks basically. They have they're creating trails, which makes them a little bit more dynamic, and they turn a little more orange. These also have some collision with some parts of the level. Yeah. So here, let me show the dash a little bit here. Now that this is up and running again. So this is our dash effect. I'll just show it a couple more times. So again, it's really fast, so there's kind of a lot going on there. And if I grab it here, right in the middle, we can kind of break it down into its parts. So I'll just pull this out. So we've got these 2 models here that have shaders on them. And you might recognize this one. This is actually the exact same cone that we were using earlier with the same shader on it, right? We got like that same effect where no matter where you look at it, you can see into it. But the back is kind of high up. And there's another one of those right here. And that goes inside that. And then there's this little ball thing over the character. And then we have these little particle effects back here. So there's a lot of different pieces making up that effect. This is another model I made, kind of like this little like birdie thing. It's pretty simple. Like the modeling is not really that complicated, right? But and then it also has bones. So these 2 are the same model. And there's a bone in the back that controls how, pulled back it is, how flared out it is. And then hopefully we won't get a crash when you do this, but I'm going to do this. So this has a shader on it, which I put together in Amplify, which is, if you're using built-in, is a great shader editor, and I highly recommend it. It's a great way to learn too, if you don't want to jump into shader code right away. Yeah, and if not, like you can also use shader graph if you're doing URP or HDRP. Yeah, and then so this is kind of this noise texture, and then I'm using a kind of like a tolerance level to determine from the noise what should be opaque and what should not be opaque. And all of this is also like animated. So there's also an animation on both of these models. And the animation is actually controlling the material as well. So there's I'm affecting that shader value that controls the tolerance level on the noise. So the noise, when you move the tolerance level, it only certain parts of the white on the noise are counted as opaque. And as you move that tolerance level up, less and less of that is counted as opaque until it sort of disappears. And this is called a dissolve shader. Yeah, so let me put that back together real quick. Cool. That's that. Now, without this, it's really like, it's kind of really weird looking, right? And without all that feedback, it just kind of looks like this, like it's almost like nothing's happening at all. And I still have like the emission on the character because I can't deactivate that in here, but yeah, you can kind of see like it's not clear that your character is invincible when that's happening. None of that is kind of like, it's not even clear anything's happening, right? I'm actually speeding up when I'm pressing this button. The sound effect is helping too, but yeah, so feedback is like really, really important. And it needs to be clear. Like this is like, okay, you look pretty protected in there, right? I just wanted to show a couple more of these. There's this cannon effect that I thought was pretty neat. And basically what's going on here is we have this like kind of unique weight painting on the cannon. So it's actually only one bone controlling this whole effect. But Kiril and I spent a day kind of going in here and trying to get this banded weight painting on the cannon. If you don't know what weight painting is, it's just sort of the way that the bones interact with the model. It's the weight, how much they control each vertice. So we're really happy with the way this effect came out. I'm doing all the animations on this stuff too, so I, take a lot of that into account when I'm making the VFX. Kiril, by the way, does all of the models and texturing, so all of this stuff. All right, so let's take a look at the down. That's the effect. Let me get a still frame of it here. Okay. So right as it's about to shoot, it kind of starts shaking in the animation. And then you've got these two rings that appear. And those are actually using a special shader so that they appear like on top of everything. Luckily, we don't have like any front walls in our game. But if we did, that would be a bit of a problem because I haven't modified this to occlude if there is a wall. But the reason why I'm doing that is because if you use like a normal particle shader on this, it kind of doesn't look so good, basically. Yeah, it just starts clipping, right? And it's a lot easier to miss. So there's a special shader on that to kind of make it more clear. This is a really important moment because you don't want to get shot by this thing. And then there's kind of a timing to it too, right? As these close in, like right about there is when it's going to shoot. So again, it's like another form of like visual communication. Then the cannonball comes out. You've got these rays that come out and some smoke and some embers, little metal bits or something. Okay. So those rays that were coming out of the cannon are actually reused like a fair amount. We're using them here on this chest. So the chest starts dim, and then when you clear like an entire room of enemies, it lights up and kind of invites you in. There's a lot of like light rays coming out of it. We use them again inside the chest at a higher density and opacity to kind of create this like fake lighting effect. And then we're even using them. I mean, you've probably seen this a lot in other games for these little beams to show you like where items are or what rarity items are. So eventually what happens is you start to create this library of textures that you're going to reuse a lot in different effects. So we have like, we have our little library in here. So we have a bunch of different like sparks and lighting effects. There's all these different animations. This one's for lightning, smoke, right? So you start kind of like creating a library and making sure that you have these simple shapes, and you'd be surprised like how many places you can use this, and like how many you can do the same thing with models too. So yeah, just creating that library is like a super important part of getting good at creating VFX. So yeah, the other thing is like programming comes in a lot, especially when you're implementing, because there's always something that you can't really control, or you need to kind of, I'll show you an example here. This is not the right one. Got a lot of saved games here, so bear with me. Okay. Yeah, so this particular effect is, we've been calling it the zip dash, but it lets you kind of like dash around the arena, try to dash through enemies and things. And there's this kind of clone effect that I wanted to do. And at first I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Like our characters all have these, you can see this one is wearing a helmet. And we have different models too for the characters. So I was like, oh, I want the clones to have the gear that you have, and I want them to be the same model. So I kind of had to create those meshes and assign whatever your character's wearing to those extra clones. So this will, if you're wearing different gear, the clone will match all that gear and everything. And then these are animated too. So they kind of spread out, they appear in front of you, and you create this path. And then again, I'm using this same cone effect here, and there's a couple particles coming out of the back. And there's this trail. So again, like a bunch of different pieces are making this up. Another place I was using some code for VFX is this lightning effect that I'm working on. So admittedly, this is probably like a little bit too many particles on this side, but the main thing I'm looking at here is this line render. So no matter where this other ball is, the line render always kind of like finds it, and it creates this lightning effect. And what it's doing here is it's just like grabbing a bunch of the points of the line render and scattering them sort of in the direction of this other ball effect. And so we're always trying to kind of like create like a bit more of a systematic effect. Look at him off the spikes there. So that we can reuse it, right? So the more reusable the effect is, obviously the better off we are, and it's easier to produce more things. And it usually just also looks more natural, right? Like lightning can hit any position, so it needs to have some code to accommodate for that. And yeah, so it's just the line render is just animated. The thickness is animated, and then you have a script on it that's just controlling the positions. And then you have, some particles that are timed with the animation that come off on the target. All right. What is next?
We have a couple of questions about the line render if you want to.
Sure. Yeah. Let's
take them right now.
Sure.
Yeah. When you create the line render, are you adding noise to it? And are you creating the line nodes through code? Or how does that, maybe you can break down how that works.
So there's no noise on this line render. You'll actually probably see let's get it to go off again here. Yeah, it's actually super smooth. If you're talking about the positioning, I guess in a way there's noise because we're randomizing the positioning. But I'm only basically randomizing the position of the line perpendicular to the axis that it's pointing. So, if it's mostly on X negative right now, then we're only going to randomize actually, I guess I'm randomizing it on both of these axes, but we're only going to randomize the other two axes. And that's just done with a random number generator. It's not really noise. I could have probably used noise. And then the line render itself, we're grabbing an array here. I guess I don't know if this is a list and array, but anyway, we're grabbing a list of numbers here and we're just scattering them. Yeah, so that's pretty much how that works.
Cool.
There is a section on noise, which I'm going to talk about in a second here. Okay. I know one of my saves got messed up, so I'm just going to blow through the first room here. I think it's this one. Yeah, that looks right. Okay. Get my cheats out here. Hit the kill all enemies button a couple times. And we'll go through here. All right. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about was communication, which there's a lot of layers of communication in a game, and VFX kind of creates a big part of that. So this example here is this kick from Smash Bros. It's Zelda's kick. And this section of it right here is the only place that it actually hits. So a lot of Smash Bros. Characters will have these really big hitboxes and they'll hit all kinds of weird places. But this one is really specific. It does a lot of damage, but it only works right here. And they put this VFX here to kind of help you figure that out. And at first you might be missing it a lot and not really understand what's going on. But once you notice that, now you're hitting it all the time. And it's kind of a fun thing to discover that adds replayability to the game. This is from Hades, which is a similar thing. This is if you get a critical release on the bow. So if you've played Hades and you draw the bow back at the zenith of the bow draw, Zagreus will turn bright white. And if you release the button right at that moment, you get this huge effect over most of the screen. I didn't even notice that this was happening until I looked it up. I mean, I knew about the effect, but I didn't realize how big it is. It just kind of, when you're doing it, it just kind of feels good to get it right. And a lot of that is because you're being reinforced with these very quick, very complicated effects. And this is a weird frame. You can barely even see Zagreus. He's right here. And there's this cone effect happening and there's all these lines on the screen. But in game, it feels really good to get it right. You might not notice it at first, but after a while, you kind of pick up on it, and that mastery of the game is enjoyable. And so we have something that's kind of like this in our game. So in action games, like a big character will won't get stunned as easily, right? So we have this this shield effect that happens on this guy, and you can't necessarily, like, it's not really that easy to see it. But eventually it kind of, here, I'll pause it. Yeah, so it's this kind of like transparent shield effect. And eventually you might notice it happening. And then later on, you might notice, hey, it's actually like changing color too. So hopefully I hit him before he hits me here. Yeah, so it actually starts blue, and then it goes to green, and then yellow, and then orange. And eventually it turns red, and then it shatters. And there you get this like crystal effect. And after that, the characters are stunned, and you can like sort of knock them around the map. Right, not standing anymore. Yeah, so that's kind of another thing that hopefully after playing the game a few times, you pick up on, and then you start to pay a lot more attention to. And it's not, like overly obvious immediately. And the point of that is like, you don't want to be doing like a ton of tutorialization on your game, right? You don't want to be like telling them everything all the time. You just want to tell them a few basic things to get started, and then have them like discover the game on their own. And like having clever VFX to explain things to people in less, like, in more subliminal ways, I guess, is a good way to do that. Okay, noise. So now we're going to talk about noise. Noise has a ton of uses, and you really need to be thinking of noise as just like 2D information in the form of color. So like you could think of the black locations on this as 0, and the white locations on this as 1, and then the gray is somewhere in like a 0.5. There's also colored noise, which if you've ever looked at a normal map, on normal maps, each of the 3 colors, R, G, and B, they all represent red, blue, and green, right? They all represent different axes. And that's like a whole other topic, and I won't get into it, but it's really interesting if you ever are interested in studying how normals work. But anyway, so you can use the red, blue, and green values as well if you wanted to have 3 different values of noise in an image. So noise is really cool. So let me show you some uses for noise. Actually, there's been a few here. So we were using noise earlier for that previous effect, and we're doing the same thing here as the dash effect. We have like a scrolling noise here, and we have a threshold that's controlling the opacity mask. So this is one example of noise. And we'll show a few more that are all using the same shader. It's this one. Yes, okay, good. Not sure how these saves are going to hold up. Yeah, so this is our legendary hammer. We're using 2 types of noise here, and I'll pull this up again. So this is sort of the color map we're using underneath the noise for this, and then we're using a couple different types of noise, and they're sort of scrolling in opposite directions here. So I'll show that. So here you can see like this one is going down to the right, and this one is going down to the left. And those are being revealed similarly kind of to the previous example with the opacity mask, except instead of using it to reveal opacity, we're using it to reveal these different effects. And so we have this noise scrolling this way, this noise scrolling that way, and then they're combine, and basically it creates this. I was trying to create this kind of effect where it looks like there's almost like a weird, colorful, magical galaxy or something swirling around inside this like rock of this hammer. So that's how we did that. And actually this is kind of a separate model too. So we have this model here, which doesn't have the shader on it. And then inside that model, we put this thing. We have this transparent stone with a normal on it. And that kind of also creates this neat like halo effect on it and has all these nice cracks and things that Kiril added to the normal map. And then this is just a kind of the same thing, but it shows that if you use like different color map for that, right, and different noise, you can get, you know, sort of different results. It's similar, but yeah. And then this guy is actually not using noise, but the thing that it produces does. But there is something interesting about this, so I figured I'd show it too, which is that it has a distortion. And this might be a little overkill for this, but I wanted the crystal to look neat. So it's actually distorting what's behind it. And it's using what the camera is seeing to do that. And it's distorting it by the normal map. So I don't know if you can see that. Maybe if yeah. And then inside of it is this emissive. It's just the same model, but shrunk down a little bit. And then it has emission on it. There's a couple other things that are happening here, but won't go too deep into that. And then this actually produces another thing that has noise on it, which is this giant magic ball thing. And that actually has like kind of the same effect, but it's a different, there are different settings on it, and it's using a different color map. So those are all using one shader, but the materials, which is the way that the shaders properties are applied, are all different. Also, this one has the outline. So these are the material properties. It actually has the outline on, whereas some of these don't. So yeah, you're getting this nice outline around it. Let's see. Yeah, and then I wanted to show too, like this particular weapon actually has a really interesting interaction with the post effects, because when you swing it, it lights up, and that light up effect really doesn't work without the post effects being on, or at least certain ones being somewhat on. So there's this kind of like, this actually looks a little weird from this angle, but the screen space reflection creates this kind of crazy effect on the walls. And then the bloom gives this like nice glow effect. And that can look really cool, like in a moment when you're swinging it, right? But without those effects, this is like a completely different effect. So I'm going to turn those off for a second. So if we do this, right, this looks like completely different. Like I'm kind of just like breaking the contrast values here, and it just looks kind of bad without the bloom. So like you really have to consider like everything in your scene when you're trying to design VFX. And yeah, sometimes you can get some like really neat results if you experiment and see how it works out. All right, so I want to talk about environment a little bit. I don't have a ton of stuff for this, but it was a good segue from noise, because I'm using a lot of, I'm using noise for one particular shader that I really like in the environment. And that shader is the moss shader. So the moss shader, which actually, shout out to Kreth Carter, because he helped me set up the original moss shader, which is sort of the ability for the moss to sink into the height map of the model and things like that. And he set me down this whole path of working on shaders. So yeah. And then I actually took that and kind of ran with it and made it into a triplanar moss shader so that we could apply it to more things. So if you're wondering what triplanar is, it's there are three planes, right? There's the Z plane, the X plane, and the Y plane. And usually a model has its own custom UVs, but with a triplanar shader, you're actually using world space and you're projecting an image from 3 different angles and fading in between. So why would you want to do that? Well, it makes it a lot easier to apply textures to things, but also I'm using sort of a noise to create this moss, and that noise is now like in world space. So like, what does that mean? Well, you see these 2 models, they're the same model, right? But they have different amounts of moss on them in different places. So if I actually grab this one and I move it, you'll see that the moss stays where it is, but the model changes position. That's because there's a projection happening. So if I move it to where this moss is, it'll actually be totally covered in moss, right? Because there's more moss there than there is over here. And that's largely because the shader they're using is kind of tuned at the same frequency, but it just creates this like really nice natural feel where the moss actually looks like it's kind of like growing across different objects onto other objects. And yeah, so it's just a really useful kind of natural technique. And it means that we don't have to hand paint moss. I mean, it looks better and we don't have to like hand paint it on everything. That is moss, triplanar moss. This is actually the exact same shader, but I've replaced well, I guess it was cobblestone before, but this is a different type of cobblestone. And then I replaced the moss with water. And there's some different settings for the height map and stuff where you can get it to fill in the cracks in different ways, which I'm playing with here. I won't show this one in editor because this is good enough. But yeah, so it's like once you've created a shader like that, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. So it's again like you're creating this library for yourself of tools to kind of play with. This one is a mesh to billboard like leaf solution for trees. So if you look at this model here on the left, it's a sphere, and it has, you know, a bunch of like, it's a pretty low polysphere, but these faces are getting lit, right? And then they're actually getting turned into billboards that always face the camera. So let me kind of show that with the actual model. I have this fancy slider here. Actually, I'll do it to this one. So this is the same type of sphere, right? It's a pretty low poly sphere. And we've got like a special UV map on it here so that this texture is appearing, like this whole texture is appearing. Maybe we can open that up. Yeah, so this whole texture is appearing on every single face. And then it's actually getting lighting, you know, like as you would expect, like these are dark and the ones up here are bright. But then we're kind of pulling it out and having it face the camera. So if it's always facing the camera, it creates this nice like full billboard effect, but it still gets the lighting that the original model had. So then you've got like darker leaves down here. And then because it's like the texture on each face isn't opaque, it kind of scatters the lighting a little bit and it creates this kind of like nice fluffy effect. Yeah. All right. So that is actually the end of my talk. So thank you for listening. I wanted to show this effect too because I thought it was cool, but I didn't make that shader, but that's another thing you can do with shaders. That's from the asset store, but all right. Any question?
That is awesome. Thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, I yeah, this is great. We had a couple of questions. When you were doing the shiny hammer, how did you get the reflections on the wall?
So those are what's called screen space reflections. So I'm just using like Unity's post-processing stack to do that. But basically, like roughly what it does, and I don't know a ton about this, but it's using this like what's already on the screen. Post-processes are like after all of the rendering, so it's using stuff that's already on the screen to kind of create fake reflections. And because I turned the color value up so high, and like I think it's like something ridiculous, like 600 contrast or something on that color effect. It had kind of a weird interaction with the screen space reflections. So if you're looking for like a reflective effect, I guess look up SSAO, or no, not SSAO. Screen space reflections. SSAO is screen space ambient occlusion. But yeah.
Excellent. Do you manipulate the post effects at runtime?
No, you can, but we don't.
Awesome. I'm trying to see if we had any more questions. Do we have any more questions? If anyone has any questions, please type into chat. This is the time.
So just to back up a second. So like what render pipeline are you using?
We're in built-in. Mostly picked that because like the post-processing stack I was using already was in built-in. I don't know. There was also, I think when we started this project, they didn't even have names for the new pipelines yet, so it wasn't clear that, you know.
Right. So that would then maybe answer another question. So like you're using the Shuriken particle system and not VFX graph.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of why you're using Amplify, even though that still works with SRP.
Yeah. Okay. See, I didn't even know this still works with SRP, but yeah, that's why we're using Amplify, because we have the older particle system. I'm excited to kind of check out the VFX graph stuff, but.
Oh, this looked really good.
Thanks.
We did have a question about the leaf tree mesh to billboard trick. Is that more performant than if you had had that exact mesh statically?
So that's kind of hard to measure, but like we originally had a static mesh. I don't know, I might have a picture of it, but mostly the reason we went with the fluffy stylized billboard to mesh tree is because it kind of matched the style more. And I think we were having performance issues with our other tree. And I don't think it was really necessarily the technique of it being static. It's just that when you have a lot of transparent geometry and it's all layered and like the shadows are all going through it, it's like very expensive. And it was hard to get a good looking tree without having a lot of layers of leaves. And then we were like, maybe we can just like stylize this a lot more. And so it is more performant, but not because of the technique we're using. It's more just because there are actually less leaf cards. And we don't need as many because they're big, round, puffy trees like our characters, right? There's like kind of an excuse there to use less leaf cards. So that's why it's more performant. But the technique itself, I don't think is particularly more performant than a static tree.
There's another question about sort of general concept art direction. Like, how do you sort of pick what your VFX should look like? Like, how do you take an idea you're trying to communicate and turn it into a VFX? Like, what does that process look like?
I think that's kind of a hard one, but I guess we look at like conventions a lot. So we'll look at like, okay, obviously I'm a Nintendo fan. So we'll look at like, oh, what does Zelda do for this? What does Smash Bros. Do for this? What is, but we'll do like anything basically. We'll look around a lot and try and just find a lot of references. And then there's definitely a balance to making sure that it's not like over the top and like you can't see anything on the screen. You want to know like what you're trying to communicate, and that dictates like how long it is and the situation is going to be in. Like we have a resurrecting the player VFX. It's super long and there's like a ton of particles all over the place. And if you had to do that like in combat, that probably wouldn't be great. So I think a lot of it is like, you know, the situation you're using it in, and then finding a lot of references, basically.
That's awesome.
I don't remember if you mentioned it or not, but the sort of like dashing effect you had where it was duplicating meshes, what was that inspired by? Like,
That's actually like, so there's like a couple different things in Smash Bros that use that. Like I think Fox dashes across the screen and creates a bunch of duplicates, and then like Pikachu does like a similar kind of thing. I don't know if they're duplicates in the Pikachu one, but like, yeah, that's definitely what that's inspired by. It's actually kind of like a similar move too in terms of the way it deals damage and yeah, picks enemies up.
It's really effective. I mean, it's yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no, there was.
How did you do the sound effects for these VFX?
So all the sound effects, I like grab things off of zapsplat.com, which is free. And you can, it's all like commercially licensed, like you can license it commercially. And the only thing is like they have a limit. I think you can only download like 5 sounds a day or something. And usually I'm just really selective and don't need more than that on a given day. And then I say keep them, right? I keep them in my thing. The only thing you have to do is like reference the website at the end of your credits in your game. And then I'll use, you can use like Audacity or Audition or something. Audacity is great because it's free. And then I just kind of like layer them and like modulate them a little bit. There's a whole thing about like EQing sounds. That could be like a whole topic, but I do that to them. So if I'm looking for something to be like the sound of the marble full of magic is like a little bit of static with like a wine glass clink, and then I think there's like a bit of a bowling ball in there too, and I'll like pull the EQ up on the clink and like remove a lot of the low end on the static, and then get rid of all of the like high, like basically make sure that I'm filling each part of the EQ when I'm making the sound.
This stuff is always so cool to see because it's sort of like, it's like watching visual Foley in a way, where it's just like all these crazy ideas you wouldn't even think about. Like, oh, turns out, I don't know what Foley artists do, but like a lion is the basis for Chewbacca or something, like that sort of like just totally off the wall kind of thinking, but it works so well. And like a lot of those like examples that you had, especially like the first one that you showed where it's the 2 cylinders inside of each other with the normals flipped, like that's just so brilliant, and it like makes so much sense when you describe it, but it's like we'd totally never think of that if I didn't see that somewhere. So
no, it's crazy what you find, cool. Like when you look into Nintendo's stuff or like any, when you really like analyze other people's stuff in VFX, you find such weird solutions. That's why I love it so much.
That's so cool.
So just sort of folding back into SFX, do you ever have you ever like done any audio reactive kind of effects, or have the audio actually drive part of the visual effects?
No, I actually don't know how I would do that. There is one effect that is like more, I guess, like I've done like pitching and stuff to kind of key things into the player, but it's always driven by like the mechanics. So yeah, the audio reactive stuff is cool though. I don't even know. There's like plugins for that, right? You'd probably know more about that than me.
Some things, I mean, you can always raid Kajiro's repo. He has a bunch of auto reactive stuff, but you can like drive shader values or blend shapes or whatever based off audio frequencies and things like that.
You may have just given me a new thing to play with.
I was going to say, do you normally like have the audio cue in mind, and then you do the VFX to match when the cue is loud or quiet, and they make the peak intensity sync up that way, or do you drive it in animations? How do you make sure the VFX and the SFX match perfectly?
So there'll be like so a lot of the animations have like animation event triggers in them to trigger like different particles, and sometimes I'll throw the sound effects in there, but like sometimes I'll just like play it at a certain time and then kind of like chop it down until it fits. But I'm always editing the sound after. I'm just like more of like a visual person, I guess. It's weird because when I edit film, like usually I get some sound or like some music and then edit to that. But in this case, it's the opposite. Like we had an animation for a gate. Well, you guys heard the sound a lot probably because every time I entered the room, and the gate kind of like goes up and then it locks in like this because I didn't want to just have it like rise up. Like I don't know. I was thinking about how it would work. So the animation like trembles and then it moves over and it locks in. Right? It's like out of whatever hole it came out of, I guess. And there were a few different like metal clinking sounds that I had, and I looked into the animation and tried to like do the math on the frame rate and didn't come out like it lined up. So then I was just like literally cutting the audio file and saving it over and hitting the play button in Unity over and over again until it looked like it fit. So yeah, a lot of it's just like chopping it a bunch of times until it's like timed right.
When you're referencing VFX from other games like Nintendo, do you just scrub through frames in video to figure out what they're doing? Do you have other good resources of folks breaking down their FX?
They're definitely out there, and there are like, I wish I could like pull. I mean, feel free to DM me, but I wish I could like pull like this thing up. It's like a study of all the VFX in Wind Waker. So other people have done like studies on those, and sometimes I'll look into that. But I do like, I think that Kirby game came out where he like wraps himself around the car. And when that came out, I was just like watching the trailer before, like I actually think it was before it came out. I was just watching the trailer over and over again at 0.25 speed. And like, after a while, you start to just be like, that's this, that's this, that's this. There were some things in there I didn't like understand at all. Whereas like, how are they doing this like water effect at runtime on the Switch? And then I remember there was like a conversation that Elliot and Kreth were having at some point about like, I think it was like, is it Limbics or whatever? Like you do a simulation and then you save the keyframes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that like enlightened me to that. So you pick things up and then you're able to kind of see more of it.
It's funny you mentioned Wind Waker. It's like the most legendary set of VFXs ever in games. Like, I feel like part of the reason why everyone is so like enamored with Wind Waker's VFX is because like they had no budget for particles or anything on the GameCube, and so it's like all these like crazy tricks like the cylinders and stuff like that. And so there's all these like really cool little nuggets of knowledge you can get from that game, and like how they structured the way they had like 3 billboards they could use in this explosion, and so they like did it this way to make it look the best. It's like so interesting to dissect.
Yeah, no, it's definitely look into Wind Waker. Like there's so many people doing dissections on it. It's really cool. Nintendo specifically is really good at it because I think they've been around for a long time, and they've also had hardware that's pretty limiting for a long time. So if you're gonna learn from somebody, you learn from them, and you create really performant VFX that look really nice. So that's good.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions? I've learned a lot tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks.
It's
for
really
having us.
cool.
This is fun.
Whenever I come to like making little abilities and effects in the game I'm working on, it's like I'm trying to make something that looks a little interesting. But these are some really useful tips. I definitely don't have the time or patience to be a full-time VFX artist, but it's really cool to watch. It seems more like behind the curtain, revealing behind the curtain than a lot of the regular.
That's good.
Stuff.
I was like, I hope this is like not too like I hope this is like technical enough, I guess. And I was so I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Do you have
Yeah,
any
I was-
resources for figuring out shader graphs or code with VFX?
Yeah, I mean, I've been recommended a lot to watch like Freya Holmer's stuff, and I've watched some of their stuff, and I definitely recommend that because very good at explaining a lot of things, and does a lot of like visual, like if you're a visual learner like me, it will draw like on the screen a lot, and that really helps me figure stuff out. So yeah, look up Freya Holmer.
Yeah, Freya's awesome.
Like Freya and Kojiro are like the two like people holding up the Unity community. Oh my god.
Do you have what's your social, or how would you prefer people to ping you with questions or feedback, or would you rather people just join the Boston Game Dev Slack and then you can ask Shane questions on there? Which is slack.bostongamedev.com.
You can definitely do Slack. We also have like we have a Discord too, so if anyone like wants to follow our game or like hang out in there, I can send a link somewhere.
You can put it on our Slack chat and I'll paste it into Twitch chat.
Okay, I'll
works.
do that now. Yeah, so you can come hang out with us there. We have like a couple other people who are doing game dev stuff in there. It's not a huge community, but there's, we have like people posting their own stuff, and yeah, it's kind of slowly growing. Is that gonna work?
While you're doing that, there's one more question. Do you plan out whether to use geometry versus particles versus shader tricks, etc., or is it just what's the best way to get this look how you want?
I mean, we plan all of the VFX because, like, if it's, I mean, we'll experiment a little bit at first, but I think by the time I'm making a model for something, like, I have a very good idea of like what I'm doing with that model. But when I was learning, it helped a lot to just like try random things out. Like, oh, what happens if I put this model in here and I do this with the UV, and it's like it'll be like shredded or something, and you'll be like, that's weird. And then so that I definitely recommend just like playing around with it, like jumping in and messing with it. But no, now we're like, we really do a lot of planning, and we know kind of like exactly what we're gonna make, and because you don't want to make like a whole animation and then have it just like, I'll do like test animations too. So like if I need to move something across the model, I'll draw like a line animating, and then I'll put that on. I'll be like, that fits, it looks good. And then, so yeah, there's a lot of planning involved for sure. And I guess, do we use like particles or models, or I try to use a little bit of everything on each VFX if I can. But some things like, maybe you just want like a little sparkle on an item. Maybe you just put a little particle in there. But yeah, I try to kind of use like the full repertoire on bigger VFX every time because it creates like a much fuller effect.
Cool.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us today. That was a really good talk. I learned a lot, and I think the audience enjoyed it quite a lot. Yeah, we will. I will post the recording on our YouTube channel once it's been processed and all the rest of it. And yeah, we'll be back again next month, which will be June. Is it June next month? It's June next month.
Yes.
Time is going so fast. Excellent. Okay. Thank you again, Shane. And thank you very much, audience. We will see you again next month.
Yeah, thanks for having me.